Go ahead on the set.
Hey, Pharrell.
Hey, how you doing, man? You know, it'd be cool is if we told my story with Lego pieces.
Seriously?
Yes.
Lego.
Just be open.
It might seem crazy what I'm about to say.
That was a clip from the new movie Piece by Piece, profiling Pharrell Williams in the style of Lego animation. Hey, I'm Allison Hare. I am a former corporate executive turned coach and keynote speaker for women making big moves. And I'm on a mission. I'm on a mission to help you and me create more space and freedom and fulfillment in our overscheduled lives. Welcome to the Late Learner Podcast, where here we ditch the outdated norms, you know, the ones that we were all taught to live in, and we find more modern approaches that just plain work better for you today. So what are we late learning today? Well, today's going to be a little bit different. And you may be hearing this often if you've been listening to my podcast. Almost every episode has been going through a little bit of an evolution, and I'm going to explain why. Today is not only going to be a super fun episode, a totally new format for me, but also you may leave here with your head spinning a little bit because there are some massive shifts that behind the scenes of Camp Late Learner. You know, there are some old patterns that honestly, I don't know that I can keep doing things the way that they were being done. Not that they aren't good ways. I just feel like there are some massive shifts, and I'm going to explain what that looks like. But it's going to pave the way for a lot of new stuff, really. But really, we're going to be telling this story today through the lens of the movie Piece by Piece. You know, I don't know if you guys know this, but in my weekly email newsletter, I always have like some kind of, you know, relatable insights and strategies and personal stories, but it always ends with a little bit of a fun twist. Well, today we're kind of putting a highlight on the fun twist, which are always through the lens of culture, of like maybe something that I've heard about or seen or watched that I feel like you guys need to be part of this conversation because it's such a reflection of where we are as a society and can teach us so much. So Piece by Piece is the new biopic that was just released about the music mogul Pharrell Williams' colorful life. But it's told in the form of Lego animation. So creative, so innovative. I guess you'll get a review in this as well. But today is going to be a little bit of a cultural deep dive, not only using this movie, but also exploring something so counterintuitive that could totally unlock massive for us both. And really, there have been some concepts that I've been seeing out in the world and in the personal development area that I'm like, it's so popular. It is so popular that people have really taken this on. And I'm like, no. Something is amiss here. Something does not add up. And I feel like the overgeneralization that we kind of consume, that we are heavily influenced by, you know, what we consume. I feel like there is something that needs to be shifted here. And I wanted to share it with you today. I've actually been a little bit nervous to put this one together for you because, you know, I keep turning it around in my head and I'm like, I just can't sign up for this. And it is conventional wisdom. So it is like defying a little bit of conventional wisdom where I think there is a better new way that I am literally living out right now. And I wanted to share it with you. So I do want to say, just as an aside, I want to give a big, giant thank you to you as a listener. If you have ever sent me a text, a DM, responded back to my weekly emails, if you've shared this podcast, if you've talked about the content that you hear and the concepts that you hear in your own circles, if you've started text chains that I've heard about too, from people going, oh my God, did you hear the new episode of Late Learner? What if we applied this in our life? You know, I am just sitting here in a microphone by myself, right? Talking to my four walls. And so while I have access to the data, you know, I have access to the numbers of how many people are listening to this podcast, how many people are downloading it. I don't know who is. So, if you are, thank you. If you've ever taken a moment to reach out or review my work and let me know what lands for you, because that only helps me make a better show. And it helps warm my cold, dead heart that absolutely needs some validation as well. But it does mean the world to me. But before we jump in, do you get my aforementioned weekly newsletter? It's called the Reinvention Roadmap. It is quick. It is a completely free way to go one-on-one with me. And every week I send you relatable insights, brave strategies, action steps to your next best chapter. And I always end, like I said, with a fun twist. If you're not on that list, go to AllisonHair.com/email. And if you are in a position where you're like, Allison, it is almost 2025. I don't want to let one more moment go by where I am not pursuing my dreams. I would love some support, or look at what could support look like to essentially reinvent or create the change that you have been desiring. So whether that is starting a podcast or a big life change or a career change, or start a business, or maybe the dynamic in your family is changing and you just don't want to do this alone. You want to create some more space and freedom in your life. I am taking on a couple of new clients, just a couple. I think I've got maybe 2 or 3 spots left to do a 3-month outcome-driven engagement where we kind of clarify what your goals are, put together a strategy, an execution plan, accountability around it to get the results that you want. So if that sounds interesting to you, go to AllisonHair.com/schedule, schedule a free call with me, and let's see what it could look like. All right, let's get into it. Okay. So piece by piece, this movie, I saw it with my kids. It is brilliant. It's PG. So imagine Pharrell Williams is collaborating, or has spent the past 20 plus years collaborating with some of the biggest rappers, stars, all over the place. It is a PG movie, and it is so inventive and creative and colorful. And it's so funny to see artists like Snoop Dogg and Timbaland and Kendrick Lamar and Gwen Stefani and Justin Timberlake and Pusha T talking with their real voices, but they're all animated in a Lego form. So it is so clever. You know how they say there's nothing new on the earth, anymore? Everything is just kind of recycled. This feels pretty new. But Pharrell Williams has something called synesthesia. And synesthesia, I had to look this up. It is a neurological condition that causes people to involuntarily combine their sensory perceptions. So what this looks like is synesthesia can cause people to see colors and patterns based on music.
I loved music. It was mesmerizing to me. I would see beautiful hues of light cascading. I just thought that's what all black kids did, stared into the speaker like, whoa.
Very famous musicians that have this neurological condition. Condition feels like it's something wrong, right? But they have this neurological trait, I should say. Billy Joel, Kanye West, Lady Gaga, Frank Ocean, Mary J. Blige, all of this. It's not listed in the DSM. It is not considered, something that interferes with daily life. And most people with synesthesia report that their experiences are neutral or even pleasant. Okay, so Pharrell said, I just thought all black kids experience music this way. And it got me thinking, do we all think we are different as a kid?
When I was a kid, I knew I was different. And people would say, oh, that's an odd child. And that crushed my spirit.
Did you feel like you were a different kind of kid? I know I definitely did. And now I feel like we label every trait, but back then we didn't, right? It was either normal or not normal, right? There weren't a lot of labels back then. And what I think is interesting, I couldn't imagine, I don't know. I always wondered about, like, do you consider yourself growing up as typical, average, everyday, or do you feel like there was always something different about me? And what I thought was interesting is I was talking to somebody from high school, and somebody from high school that was totally a popular girl. I was not, but she was. And when she was reflecting back, I think she was emailing me back in response to one of my weekly emails where I was talking about a little bit of my high school experience. And she was saying I related to it so much that I always felt like I was rejected. I always felt like I had these friends and then they would no longer be friends with me. I always felt really hurt by it. And I thought, wow, do we all feel like something is different about us? You know, we see it reflected in a lot of cultural shows like 13 Reasons Why, the show about this girl who died by suicide and gave 13 reasons why that were pinning it on 13 different people from all different spectrums. And you get to see their perspective of what life was like. And every single one of them, the rich one, the popular one, the ones that looked like they had it all seemed to really struggle. And I don't know if that is just the plight of being a teenager and hormones and all of that. And I always thought when I was dating and I would be on the apps and I would see people describe themselves, men describe themselves, I'm just your average, ordinary, typical guy. And I'd be like, why the fuck would I want an average, ordinary, typical guy? And I would always pass right by them. And so I just wonder, do we all think we're different? You know, we wanted to fit in, but also stand out. Like for me, I was always a deep thinking kid. Music impacted me really deeply. Today, even now, like I can hear faint music in the background louder than the person across the table from me in a coffee shop. And that has always been the way. I wasn't popular. I was a loud mouth. I wasn't like a nerd, but I was, you know, I was not popular. I was just a loud mouth. And so I would talk back to people and I would get my ass kicked. I literally would get my ass kicked. And I even got indoors suspension for it. They got outdoor suspension, but I got indoors suspension. You know, I was a BC student. You know, I sucked at math and science, and I didn't realize that I have recently been diagnosed with ADHD. And so I kind of look back at that time of going, oh, if I had only known. You know, I struggled with all the classic traits of somebody with ADHD, other than like I wasn't hyperactive, right? But I wasn't interested. It seems like when you see all the memes and like how it's identified today, looking back on it, it was so obvious, right? It was so obvious where I struggled. And so I always considered myself different. Like school was, I was an average student. I was never the worst. I was never the best, but I struggled and I kind of like disassociated from identifying with my grades as much as I did my internal world, which was really music. You know, all I wanted to do was like make mixtapes for people. That is how I shared and expressed how I feel. You know, I always felt really emotional depths, but I didn't really have an outlet for it other than writing and making mixtapes of my favorite music, which God forbid was not mainstream because that wasn't me. But I wonder, is that just me? Is that you too? So here's the main point that had me thinking on a different track, almost confirming something I've been turning over again and again and again. And it might be totally controversial, but remember a few episodes back, I was talking, it's episode 226. It's called The Trouble with Healing. It was released on September 19, 2024. And I was talking about my beef with the personal development industry, and basically that in the self-help world, in the personal development world, if you click on any podcast episode, any social media account, I feel like the self-help industry is almost perpetuating that something is wrong or broken with us because we are over-labeling everything. Now, caveat, I do feel that some of the labels are helpful, but when you're constantly consuming so much, I end up realizing, God, I feel like shit when I listen to too much Mel Robbins. You know, even though I love Mel Robbins, I love what she's doing in doses. And I feel like every episode is titled How to Fix 3 Steps to Enlightenment. Improve your sex life. Everything is highlighting what is broken or missing. And what I feel is like we are not broken. At least people who are listening to this podcast and people that work with me. You know, I'm a coach and do private coaching and group coaching. I do keynote speeches where I talk to women. People generally that listen to this podcast and are working with me, they aren't broken. They may have experienced a shitload of trauma, but they have simply outgrown their container. They have simply outgrown their container. So all the walls that come up when you have experienced trauma, you know, to kind of protect yourself, at some point, those walls are helpful and then they no longer are. And so as you kind of outgrow where you are and you're realizing all that friction in that space, it's time to grow bigger. So let me just set the stage for that. Now, in the movie of Piece by Piece, Pharrell Williams sets up the concept of telling his story through Legos.
You know what I always thought about? What if life is like a Lego set? And you can put it together piece by piece.
Take it apart brick by brick and put it back together piece by piece. People who listen to this show generally are often in a state of transition, a state of transformation, reinvention. They're contemplating something new, something different, something more aligned. That's why this podcast is called Late Learner, because you are always continuously learning, growing, developing what is the next phase, what is the next iteration of who you are, what is your next best step. And in Piece by Piece, Pharrell gets to this point where he is on fire. Everything he touches turns to gold. And he decides, and this is really not a spoiler, right? I mean, you could read his story anywhere. But he decides at this moment where he is hot. And he even talks about, like, I was arrogant. I was so arrogant that I just wanted to crank out hits. And he would write songs specifically for a hit. He's submitting songs that literally are aimed at the charts, and they fail completely. They suck. And he gets this tough love from his mentor that the moment he is chasing the formula, the moment that he's chasing the formula of what got him there is not going to get him to the next place, right? The moment he is chasing the formula is the moment he loses the magic that has made him so successful. Pharrell is known as this eclectic songwriter and producer that refuses to fit in any box. His sound is different, and that's what makes him so successful. Our ears are not used to hearing what he puts out there, which sounds so refreshing because it sounds like his creative factory. It sounds new and exciting and fresh. And here is how I translated this back to my own current experience and maybe yours too. Personally, this podcast, like I said at the top of the show, it's going through a massive shift right now. And what I've done before, I am so proud of. I am so proud of the interviews that I've done, the kind of topics that I've covered in this, a lot of topics that nobody's talking about, different perspectives. I've brought on incredible experts like Seth Godin and Jesse Itzler and Mariel Hemingway, and incredible thought leaders and scientists and professors and researchers, people that are just on the cutting edge of figuring out that what we have done before may no longer serve us. So what does a new path look like? And, you know, I am so proud of Late Learner and what I've done. I'm 200 and I don't know how many episodes I am at this point, but 230 something episodes of this podcast. And I feel like the direction of Late Learner is going into a totally new territory. And what doesn't feel right is the majority of episodes have always been interviews. And I feel like I am being called to do more solo episodes. It's been an interesting discovery to not rely on Old Faithful, which are, for me, interviews are super easy and they're so fun and they're so exciting to kind of divert the attention to the experts. So what does it look like if they are more solo episodes? You know, like there's a little bit of, I don't want to say imposter syndrome, but I think there had been resistance from me of I'd rather get an expert on here. But I'm starting to realize that, yes, I want to have the experts on here, but moving the needle in a way that I feel like is more helpful to us and not perpetuating the thought that we are broken or something is wrong with us, because I don't believe that anything is wrong with us. We are just moving into a new space. It's like wearing clothes that are just too tight and they're tattered. And we're looking for what are new clothes that are just going to fit better. They're going to be styled better. I'm going to move around more confidently because it feels more like me. So what doesn't feel right is having the majority of interviews. And then what also doesn't feel right is positioning myself as having the answer to all your problems. That has never felt right. And believe it or not, I have played around where people are like, Allison, you've got so much success in this specific area. And what I'm thinking about is my husband, like my husband and my marriage, I'm so proud of. I'm very precious about it. And people would say, you know how many people would kill for that? Teach that. And every time I would go in that territory, I hated it. It felt like I was monetizing my relationship with my husband in a way that did not feel authentic. And so I would feel a lot of pushback of like positioning myself as having all the answers. And so I love continuing the path. Like I'm experimenting. I'm in this phase of just creative experimentation. That is what I do with my clients, which I love. And I'm in this phase myself. So understanding that, you know, I'm really great at strategy and execution and discipline and motivation and accountability with that. And I'm kind of doing it myself, you know? And so, and the last thing is forcing content for the sake of content. This has been so crazy to me, is that there are times when I'll sit down and I'm like, all right, I got to make a podcast. What am I going to talk about? You know, next week, in 2 weeks, whatever it is. And I have plenty of interviews in the bank, right? Like I can easily just go to those. But everything in my body is saying, no. You got to do this on your own. This is time to trust yourself. So what does feel right is going with the flow and being a little bit at the mercy of the muse. It's a little bit of an exercise in intuition and trust and faith and clearing enough space, which has been, I don't even know how to explain it to you. It has been really challenging, but when it hits, like when I give myself enough space and when I say no to the pre-existing formula and say, nope, I am going to leave space or create space for the answers to come. And I don't think that this is going to be a forever formula. I think this is a transition formula to really strengthen that voice. You know, I feel like it is divine guidance. I feel like it is divine mapping that I need to be open to it because something very big is happening. What does feel right is doing more cultural deep dives and connections, you know, about those. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with StrengthsFinder. It's like a personality assessment. And I scored really high. Actually, my top trait is connectedness. Connectedness is, you know, I am certainly a super connector, but I think in this context, it's really making connections between two maybe seemingly different things and finding the through line between multiple ways to create something more cohesive. And so I have always put what I think is interesting in my weekly emails. I always have these PS, PPS, PPPS, and there are things that I found culturally that I want to share with you that I feel like are really shifting our culture in some way, or a reflection of our culture. And they're usually really fun, or fun finds. And what is interesting is like, that's like me. That is me. Not like having all the answers to the universe. I don't want to be that way. I never want to be that way. You know, the number one trait in happiness, overall, the studies have shown that the number one thing is curiosity. Curiosity. Because if you have all the answers, and I'm not saying anybody else positions themselves as having all the answers, but many really do. And maybe you have the answers in certain areas, but I love the vibe of just curiosity. And I teach that to my son all the time. You know, my son asks incessant questions. And I always tell him, just keep asking those questions. Just never stop asking those questions. Because once you're a know-it-all, then you're closed for business. We don't want that, right? We want curiosity to be open. And what does feel right is less polish and editing, which also is very hard for me as well. But just kind of going with the flow. And if you like the way I'm talking now, like essentially I'm like talking to you if you're on the other side of the table at a coffee table, or if you feel like I'm rambling and not getting to the point, this may not be the good show for you, the best show for you. And I invite you to move on. And so that's kind of like the release and the trust and the intuition and the faith that the right people will stay and come on board. And those that aren't into it, I have to be okay with letting that go too. So with all of this, I'm a little bit freaking out. And here is the revelation that I might get a ton of shit for because it defies conventional wisdom. So okay, this is what came to me so profoundly. And then when I was watching Piece by Piece, I'm like, yes, this is what we are constantly being taught. Okay, so Glennon Doyle's podcast is called We Can Do Hard Things. And you know what I think? So like and Glennon Doyle's done some amazing things. When I listen to Glennon Doyle, generally speaking, I'm not going to be, a lot of times I'm a little bit annoyed by it, and maybe that's just my own bias, but generally speaking, she has incredible guests. She asks magnificent questions, and she is so articulate the way she describes feelings and the way she describes things. And so no shade to Glennon Doyle. I think she, and the way she uses her voice right now. But the concept of this podcast is to throw yourself into battle of doing the hard things, being motivated, doing the hard things. But I feel like we are constantly doing hard things. Constantly. Our life is hard. All of our lives are hard in one way or another. Like living a life that you worked your ass off for, and you wake up one day and realize, wait, I think I need something different, something more aligned. And you don't do anything different because you're so fearful that you're going to lose it all. That's scary. You know, the fear of the unknown is too scary. That's hard. And also, we are the fixers of everything. We are the ones that people come to. You know, there's so many people that rely on us, whether it is at home, at work, in our families, in our communities. They count on you to have the answers all the time. That's hard. And believe it or not, most people who are the fixers, they generally don't ask for help because they're always the ones helping. They feel like, I don't want to burden anybody. I'm just going to handle it myself. And one thing I noticed, I'm not crying about this, but I noticed that generally speaking, nobody checks on me. Nobody checks on me except for one person. I'm going to shout her out. Her name is Sally Ann, Sally Ann King. She checks in on me every week. And she's amazing, but nobody else does. And I know I'm not complaining about this. I know that there are people that I know in my life that are strong. They are the fixers. They're the ones that are problem solvers. And there are times where I'm like, I really want to check in on, on Sophia, but I don't because I assume they're good. They probably wouldn't want to hear from me anyway. Isn't that weird? So, we struggle when in pain, whether it's physical or hidden mental anguish that we keep to ourselves so we don't burden anyone else. And that's hard. I think that's why we have a loneliness epidemic. I think that's why we have a mental health crisis. I think that's why we have an obesity crisis, because we cope in so many different ways, whether it's addiction, whether it is over shopping, whether it is whatever. All of this is hard. All of it is hard. Addiction is sky high, all of this. We are sicker than we've ever been. Cancer and disease, high blood pressure, diabetes, obesity, all of that is through the roof. We are always doing hard things. And then we put additional pressure that we need to be more disciplined, more motivated, more, do harder things. And what if the answer is to break up with hard? What if the answer is to do things that have least path of resistance because it feels right and it feels easy for you, because it puts you in flow? So many years ago, I think it was 2012, Esther Perel put out a TED Talk. And it was something when she was promoting her book, Mating in Captivity. And the question was, I'm paraphrasing, I probably should have pulled this up so I have the right one, but you can Google it. It's one of the most popular TED Talks that have ever been released. Esther Perel is a very famous, world-renowned, magnificent relationship coach. And she asked the question, or at least the title was something along the lines of, how do you keep your spark alive with your partner? And what I was so profoundly moved by, and whenever I heard this for the first time, I had no hobbies, no podcast. I was just working a lot, raising young kids and toddlers. And I heard this podcast. And I remember at the time, my husband would say, Allison, you should have more hobbies. Why don't you have any hobbies? I had zero hobbies except to watch reality TV. I would watch every Real Housewives, every single reality TV. I would watch them all. That was really the only thing that I did. And then I listened to this TED Talk, and she talks about the answer, the punchline really, is to be in your element. That's how you keep your partner and the spark alive. Because when you're in your element, when you're doing what lights you up, what feels easy, what feels nourishing and illuminating, that's where you light up. When you are lit up like that, people are drawn to you because you don't need anybody else to validate you because you're lit up. And when I heard that, all I could see was me on a stage. And background on me, I told you I wasn't a very good student. I didn't really have anything I was excellent at. I just had this deep love for music, but didn't have anything that was recognizable for in terms of achievement. And I had no discipline to even practice music when I would take flute and piano and voice lessons and all of that. But when I got to college, I took a voice and diction class. And when I took it, I remember standing at the front of the room. My professor's name was Ernest Wiggins. And I felt like all the lights in my body flipped on at the same time. It was like going from black and white Wizard of Oz to Technicolor. And it really was just like that. And I knew that my gift was my voice. I knew that whatever God gave me, it was my voice. And my mission was, how do I use my voice as a force for good? Which is the question I continuously ask myself. But I'd always put that on a shelf, always. And I would go into what's going to make me money. sales, marketing, sales, sales, sales. So I did that for 20 plus years. But all this creative stuff, that's where I felt like I was in my element, was writing and speaking. That's what came easy and came naturally to me. I just never pursued it in a professional way because my ego was so caught up in everything else. And also, I want to put food on my table. I want to provide for my family. And I didn't realize you could do both. I did not realize there was a way to do both. And maybe back then, the options were way less than they are now. Now the options are infinite. The question is, if you have 50 different doors that you could possibly walk through, which is the one that you need to walk through right now? That's the kind of work that I do with my clients, of like helping you clear out the clutter, but also what I'm doing with myself and with mentors that I'm working with as well. I have my own coaches and people that are in my corner helping me decipher, like, out of all these 50 doors, what is the one? You know, like, that's where people need help. Where do I hyper focus and get clarity on where do I go from here? And so why this transformation of my podcast and my business has been particularly challenging right now is because I'm breaking up with hard. And I'm experiencing so much resistance to keep doing things that, you know, I've always known how to do them. And I think all of the oversimplified, repeatable formulas to have the life of your dreams just plain hasn't worked in the way it's delivered. My brand, if you call it a brand, who I am has always had a different twist. I'm clearing out enough space to no longer fight what feels so easy to me. And that requires faith and trust and connectedness. You know, how can I make this easier? By finding my own natural rhythm instead of being on autopilot or forcing it through. And this is the work I do for my clients. How do we clear enough space where you can let your true self emerge and do it on your own terms, rather than the conditioned self that makes you feel squeezed in a box that no longer fits. You aren't broken. That friction you feel, that thing that's gripped on your heart saying, listen to me. And no matter what you do, it will not let go. You've just outgrown your container. I want you to listen to that feeling, that grip of like, I think something needs to shift. It's time to grow into something new. And what I do with my clients, and you know, you don't have to work with me to put this into action. I will tell you my secret. I have one framework that I take everybody that works with me through, and I call it boom, room, and bloom. And the boom is like, what gives you energy? What is easy for you? What brings you joy and excitement? Like, I think the thing that I've put on the shelf is all the cultural stuff. Like, my podcast has had 45 different names, but it has always been through the lens of culture, of like, what is the next iteration, the next version, the next best version of what is next? How do I do this in a way that feels more aligned, that is more empowering, and that is going to help me have the life that I have dreamed about? That we only have this one life, right? So what is the boom? What gives you the boom? Once you identify what gives you the boom, and if you're wondering what that is for you, I have an exercise. It's a free download. It's 40 ways to add energy to your day, but really is like, what is your boom? It's totally free. You can go to AllisonHair.com/energy and download yours, and I'll link it in the show notes too. But once you have energy, you have a little bit of boom in your life, then we look at room. This is like setting boundaries, creating a little more margin, you know, kind of replacing and identifying when everything is a priority. It's hard when you're in that survival mode, right? And so having a little bit of dose of dopamine to identify what could actually go. How do I reposition a few things so I can get more energy and do more of what I love? So boom, room. And the last thing is bloom. And bloom is creative experimentation, creative exploration. That is what I'm doing in front of you today. That is what I believe that the people that are working with me and are listening to this, of what would it look like if you were to take experiments, like not make it so life or death, but like, What is it that you really want to do? How do you do more of it? And experiment. You don't have to leave your job. And in fact, I feel like the way I left my job, I don't recommend that to anybody. You know, I left my job without a plan, on purpose, on account of profound burnout. And I asked my husband, just give me 6 months to figure something out. And while I did, I think what I have learned is that there's so many other ways to create more space and freedom so that you can have the life that you want now without having to blow up everything, right? And so I just think, you know, my weekly newsletter, I've done this for 3 years, week after week. I'm switching everything around. You know, culture is how we evolve. It is how we see ourselves, and sometimes that spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down a lot easier. And I think we need to break up with hard a little bit more and find your own flow. So I went off on a rant the past 10 minutes. I just went for it, and I hope to hear from you. Truly, I hope to hear, how does this land? Does this move you? What will you do differently? Will you share this with one person that's in a spot where they could use a little bit of juice, maybe to make that change? What is possible on the other side of creative experimentation? And this is the hill that I live and die on. And I'm so grateful for you listening. If you got any value from this, can you please leave a review on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify? Share it with a friend. And if you're interested in working with me, get on a free phone call, AllisonHair.com/schedule, or at the very least, get on my email, AllisonHair.com/email. I can't thank you enough for listening and for your ears and for your consideration. And if I don't see you on the socials where I normally hang out, I will see you next week when the next episode drops.
One day you wake up and you realize that this was all designed. And there's potential for us to change it.
That was dope. Yes, sir.